Okay, that is something that I've found with regard to the Donald Trump and his supporters. I've never seen anything like that in my life. The amount of like loyalty and I'm looking for a good word, like fervor, whatever, that surrounded him. I've never seen anything like that. Mm-hmm. He's a very polarizing figure, and so that's kind of what, in your opinion, that's when the alarms went up, and you're like, okay, I got to start speaking out. Correct?
Yes, it was seeing this demagogue, because obviously this was a country that had slavery, had institutionalized racism. So all of those things I knew from my studies, the existing kind of racisms and hatreds can get kind of energized when these demagogues come on the scene. So here comes Trump, who immediately I saw was different than any other political figure. And everything he did was extremely familiar to me, in the rallies, the loyalty oaths, the appealing to every kind of extremist. So already in the fall of 2015, I wrote this op-ed for CNN, and I wanted to call it Trump's race war, because it was like, again, this is 2015. It was very obvious what he was trying to do, which was he kind of scanned the political marketplace to see what was missing. And he saw that it was ripe for somebody to take all these kinds of extremists, all these malcontents, all these racists, and make them feel elevated, and he said, I love you. You're forgotten no longer. And this is what all of these fascists and demagogues do. So I thought, I have a skill set, I'm recognizing this stuff. And sometimes I would write op-eds, and I was so early that nobody would accept them. Like, I wrote a piece January 2016 saying that Trump was going to have a personality cult, and if he got the nomination, we were in big trouble. And nobody wanted this piece, because they were like, what are you talking about? It's January 2016. He's hardly started his campaign. I just saw it really clearly. So I opened a blog at HuffPost, which you could do at the time. And that's how I got it published. Like, I published it myself, basically, because nobody wanted this thing. They couldn't see what I could see.
I think part of that problem, right, and not being able to see is because I feel like the amount of let's say shade, right, for lack of a better word, that the media was throwing on him actually did him a lot of favors. No one took his campaign seriously, and just the being a political outsider, an underdog, right, like that all kind of fed into his campaign, and it worked. So it's very interesting, and that you were able to kind of pick this up. And I'm assuming kind of from a modern standpoint, sort of a political outsider, right? So that, like, kudos to
Totally.
you for seeing that.
Yeah, a lot of and as it turned out, then I did this book Strongmen that came out in 2020. So I did research on all of these demagogues and stuff, and a lot of them come from outside of politics. And they had, like, Mussolini was a journalist. Hitler wanted to go to art school. Mobutu in the Congo was a journalist. And so they're able to communicate really well, but they're able to use propaganda. And so they position themselves as a kind of outsider figure and a new figure. And they excite people because they speak differently than classic politicians. And they use media differently than classic politicians. And it's very interesting, when Trump started lying, there are these studies that show that because he positioned himself as like a rogue figure, like a rule breaker, some people kind of liked the fact that he was stretching the truth, because that was part of his, like, saying F you to the establishment. So, and it's the same with when he was right before the election, when the Access Hollywood tapes came out, and he was like, talking about women and, being sexual assaulter. And people said, oh, that's going to end his career. And I was like, it might actually help it, because he's already been established as the rule breaker, the transgressor. So this outside or rogue business that you brought up is actually really important.
It is. And that kind of leads me into the, the next portion of what I want to discuss with you is when you have a world that, in my opinion, it's in a little bit of chaos, right? We've got war for the first time in Europe. We're having, issues with Saudi Arabia, China. There's a lot going on geopolitically. And I'm trying to figure out where we are, all of us are, within a historical context, right? Are we in the 1910s, 1911, right before World War I? Are we in 1936? Like, when you take a look at the political landscape domestically and also geopolitically, where, in your opinion, do you think where do you think we are?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. We're living through this historical time. It's unbelievable. And that's why many people are exhausted and they're like, just want to check out because everything's very intense. Because on the one hand, authoritarianism is spreading. Yeah. And you have these guys, like I had a feeling Putin was going to do something because they're aging out, a lot of these guys. They are having to use more repression. Putin was becoming very unpopular. So when they're in that stage where they start feeling maybe they've reached their peak, they do reckless things. And in fact, in my final chapter of my book, it's called Gambling for Resurrection. They do like a big gesture. So what we're seeing right now is authoritarianism is spreading, but these regimes are being revealed to be weaker than people thought. So look what's happened to Putin. He starts this war, and then it's huge that the Russian military, which everyone was supposed to be afraid of, is effed up. Yeah. You said I could be frank, right?
You could say fuck. Yeah. You're good.
That's an enormous thing that has happened. And this is why Putin has nowhere to go but become more and more, aggressive. And then look what's happened in China, where it's a very different situation, but you had protests. And so these regimes are being revealed to be really, in a way, weak. And that, unfortunately, is going to drive them to be more aggressive. On the other hand, we don't talk about this enough, but we're living through this global renaissance of protest. And 2019 was a record year for nonviolent protest around the world. And since then, look what we had. Like, even in the pandemic, Black Lives Matter was the largest social movement in American history. It had 20 million people participated in a Black Lives Matter event. And there was multi-generational, multiracial. That's like a really big deal. And now look at Iran. I mean, those people going out day after day in Iran, they've been killing thousands of them, and they're still going out. So it's like everything's coming to a head in a way, because, again, you have more repression because I think these dictators I think they know secretly it's not sustainable. Like, Putin's kleptocracy isn't sustainable, and he knows it. And then you have this incredible movement, new generations who are protesting. So that's where I think we are. It's every day I look at the news and I'm like, my God, what a time to be alive.
And that's exactly, I echo some of the same things, the same sentiments, right? You have, especially within the movement in Iran, you have young, old, you have just the youth saying, we want freedom. Like, and a lot of people and we've had guests, Iranian dissidents on this podcast before. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people don't realize it used to be a very liberal society, right, in the 60s, and there's still people that are alive that remember what it was like before it was the Islamic Republic, when they were under the kind of the rule of the Shah, or we can even go back to the 50s, and I'm gonna butcher the guys. John, I'm actually gonna need you to pull him up because I can't think of his name right now, but the guy that tried to nationalize oil, and then with regard to Xi Jinping, basically becoming a modern day emperor, I don't know how sustainable that is. I think that something is going to happen, right? Whether it's the people, because they are starting to protest. There's also, if you want to get way into the weeds, there's a lot of Chinese people that are filming the, for lack of a better term, concentration camps that are in these far out provinces and putting it on YouTube. Like, you can't stop that level. You can't repress. You can repress people, but like that, your dirty laundry is going to get out because of technology. And John, I don't know if you might be able to link some of these like videos of people driving to these provinces.
Yeah, definitely.
It's really freaky.
Yeah. Were you talking about Mohammed Mossadegh?
No. Just type in like Iranian nationalized oil coup 1950 or something. I can't. Mohammed Mossadegh, I think that's his name. Mossadegh.
Well, one of the things the reason I wanted to write this book, Strongmen, about 100 years of authoritarianism, is to show what stays the same and what changes. And on the one hand, social media and kind of information warfare makes it easier to just disseminate propaganda, much easier, much faster. But it's also created all of these, we can call them citizen journalists, people with smartphone cameras. And it's very difficult to control those people. And in fact, in China, the protests started because, people, this experience of lockdown had created an entire, like millions and millions of people who felt very frustrated with the government. And when they heard about the apartment fire in this faraway province, perhaps they normally wouldn't care. And that's the same province where the concentration camps are. But they felt really badly, so they started to have these candlelight vigils, like in Shanghai and other places, and they were put on social media, and that's what caused it to spiral. So that's why, of course, so many dictators, temporarily or permanently, ban certain platforms. Use them to track people. TikTok's a big problem because it can record your data and your location and stuff. So it's a double-edged sword, but I think that it's hugely helping this kind of mass protest that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. What are some of the the reoccurring themes that emerge within dictators? Like, are there certain levels of dictators? This is something I really haven't given a ton of thought to, but I'm super interested in.
Well, you see, certain personalities who are ruthless and opportunistic, and they will be anything to anyone. They will say anything to anyone. They are the types of amoral personalities who gain power. And very unfortunately for America, I saw that Trump had the same personality as these other people. Now, the outcome obviously is very different today. We don't have as many one-party states outside, communist countries. But somebody who will stop at nothing to get to power, and who, for example, Trump, he was very different than any president of any other party because his goals were autocrat goals. He wanted to make money off of the presidency. So he spent 1 out of every 3 days visiting Trump-branded properties, not governing in the White House. He was visiting his businesses. And then he wanted to radicalize, people through racism. So he worked really, really hard at his propaganda. So when people say that he was lazy, I'm like, no, he wasn't lazy. He just had different goals. He was tweeting like 120 times a day.
I know.
So he worked really hard at certain things, like fleecing people. These are autocrat things: corruption, propaganda, intimidating the party, getting control of the GOP, which is a huge story. Like, he managed to take this party and make it his personal tool, right? So that kind of personality recurs. The other thing, I'll mention one other thing, is this victimhood complex. All of them have to be the victim. And in fact, in the book, I have this incredible poster from the 1920s, a Nazi party poster. So Hitler, he comes up and he does his putsch, it fails, he goes to prison. Fine. He comes out and he's speaking, and he's a very, compelling speaker But the state authorities, different German states, they saw what a danger he was, so they banned him from public speaking. So the Nazi Party issued this poster, which is literally Hitler canceled. He has tape over his mouth in the poster from 1926 to 27. And it says, of all the people in Germany or all the people in the whole world, only I am, banned from speaking. So all of these guys are the victims. That's part of them being the outsiders too. And that sets them up against the establishment, against elites, against democratic elites. It feeds into their use of conspiracy theories, right? I'm banned and it's the Jews. Who are the enemies out to get me? Today it's the deep state. Today it's the EU or it's NATO for Putin. Back then it was the League of Nations for the fascists. So every single one of these guys, take Erdogan in Turkey, he's talking about witch hunts all the time and people out to get him, people insulting him. So when Trump comes up and he's like, it's like checking the boxes with this guy. He comes up and he's like, I'm the most persecuted person in the whole world. I was like, I wrote a piece for my newsletter. I'm like, oh, well, so-and-so and so-and-so said they've been the most persecuted person in the whole world. So these are these things that recur and people fall for them every time.
Why do you think that is? Because it's something that is fascinating me. I mean, on one hand, I think that certain people are thinking, all right, like we just need a change. And in the case of Putin, I don't really understand how that is. I mean, maybe you just accept it, but let's use Trump for example. It's an outsider. Maybe he's going to change things, and let's just see what happens type of deal. Is that generally the sense you get in your studies, or is it something that's a little bit more deeply seated in the human psyche?
It's both. Because for some people, these guys they're charismatic. They really know how to use emotion they're performers. So they use emotion to connect with people. When Trump says, like Trump's saying on January 6th, I love you. And he was telling these people, you're the forgotten, nobody has cared about you in 2016. I care about you. And so he's so all-powerful and so supposedly rich, and he's got everything every man would want, beautiful women, riches. So when someone like that reaches out, supposedly caring about the little man, that is very compelling. So that's part of it. And they know how to put on a show. They know how to speak. They know how to use media. All of them have been extremely, like Modi in India, he was making holograms of himself to use at rallies. And go and check out his Instagram. He Instagrams his life in a very skillful manner. So they really know what they're doing with communication, with emotion. They're personality cults. They're the man of the people, but they're the man above all other men. So you admire them. So that's part of it. But there's also the racism, where they consciously appeal to people who want to have an enemy. And that differs in different contexts, right? In India, Modi is the engine of Hindu nationalism against Muslims. So anti-Muslim is a big thing all over the world. In China, those are the people in the concentration camps. And for Trump, it was Muslims too. But, non-whites, immigrants, all the roster of people, as well as the press. So different people respond to different things, but those are also things that recur. Having an enemy, using racism, and seducing people.
Yeah, so you consider Modi to be, and I'm very ignorant of Indian politics. Do you consider him to kind of be a strong man? Do you kind of think of him as a dictator in a sense?
He's when we like the word dictator, we could use it for somebody like Putin. Nowadays, like you don't shut down the other parties, and you don't shut down entirely the press. So he's an authoritarian for sure, and he's been taking over the media. What you do, for example, he just got an ally of his to buy out one of the last independent media outlets. And so you get one of your cronies. That's what Putin did very early on in the early 2000s. You get your cronies, the oligarchs, and you can call them different things in different countries, to buy out or take over media properties so that you personally don't. It's not like under Nazism, the state, owned everything, let's say, all the media. Today, it's more subtle. You have your cronies and your allies who own stuff. The same in Orban's Hungary. So Modi's doing that. And the word that we use is autocratic capture, where you're capturing the judiciary, you're capturing the media, but it's done in a way that's a little more subtle than in the 20th century.
Damn.